Going to introduce yourself and tell me what grade we just witnessed and what school this is, and this is just for our records and all that.
Okay, and do I say Reno too as well, or no?
Sure, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Great. I'm Katie Scherr. The lesson you saw was a 3rd grade writing lesson at Collin Ranch Elementary School.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right, so we want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before this lesson and what will come after it? Discuss the sequence of lessons that surround this one lesson.
All right, can you just read the beginning again?
Sure.
With what you said?
How does this lesson connect to it? Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Wrong one. Okay, yes. How does the lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge?
Okay.
And the second part is what was taught before, and then what will come after this one lesson.
Okay. And I'm looking at you when I'm talking? Because,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah,
all right.
you just completely ignore that.
Perfect. Okay. What we were focusing on, or what we have been focusing on for the beginning of the year was for students to be able to read text and then answer questions based on finding those answers in the text. That's a very difficult concept for 3rd graders to do because they're 8, and we have never really asked them to critically think about what they do when they're trying to find things in text. So we spent a good portion of the year doing that piece of it, and now we're really emphasizing the writing part of it. So today you saw the beginning of, probably now that we know this, will be more of a 3-day series as opposed to a 2-day series, what it had originally intended to be, but really reading and getting into the rich text of what we're trying to do. We spent pretty much 4 days before this day in just reading the story over and over again. And when we did that, we were really looking at different pieces of it. We were looking at you and me's feelings as opposed to Homony's, where the grandmother was coming from. And so where we're going with this is to find more evidence from that question that we saw earlier. And then from that piece of the graphic organizer, then they'll take that and write a draft that would support their answer. So it's really going back to that standard of writing something to give an opinion and giving text as that answer, giving text as that evidence that we're needing.
Excellent. So is the text used in this lesson part of a sequence of text designed to build skills and knowledge? And if so, please give examples of other texts that form this sequence.
Oh my. That's a really good question. Wow, that's a good one. I have to think about that one for a minute.
We'll take your time.
Huh. Wow, I really don't know. That's an excellent question, because I'm pretty much just following. I don't really want to say that I'm following the book, but I mean, we've gotten deeper with the text as opposed to I don't know if I've really analyzed the text to make sure that we've started at something a little bit, well, I shouldn't say that. I think we have started at some text. I couldn't necessarily specify what text it is, but as we've moved forward within our series and what we've done looking deeper at the text, but I haven't personally analyzed the text itself to see, am I progressively getting harder with the text as we go? Kind of seeing what happens with the students and what they're able to handle and what they're able to really go deeper into, and seeing if they're ready for that next challenge of where we go. And then looking to see what opportunities are out there for teachers as far as resource goes, because we are looking for something totally different than what we've had in the past. It used to be before we would follow questioning. So I haven't really looked at the text with that.
No, it's totally fine.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about the standards targeted in this lesson. Talk about the standards targeted in this lesson, and what did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
Well, the target of the standard was to focus on a specific topic of text, and then from that topic of text was to allow the students to form an opinion from it, and then to justify that with the text that they were finding. It's also, when you think about what students would be doing with an opinion, it is also talking about their point of view. And that's why at the very beginning we talked just briefly about what is an opinion, where it's a belief, feeling, or something that you think. And so it should allow, hopefully, for the students to be able, once we're finished with the graphic organizer, to be able to pick and choose which pieces of evidence that we identified in the text that they would want to use when they're writing their own opinion in that writing draft to support what their point of view is.
All right. Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplifies?
I think that the core action that it best exemplifies would probably be when we're thinking about using text and really allowing students to dig deeper into the text. We're talking more there with core action 1. But then when you go down to core action 3, having the teacher allow students time to talk about what they're thinking, to look at text, to look at it more deeply, and really dive into what the text is saying. I think that was really a focal point on today's lesson. I'm not quite sure, in looking back and thinking about it in my own head with 31 students in the room, you're not really quite maximizing your time with that. So it is something that's provided for them as it indicates in core action or core indicator 3. However, it wasn't necessarily something that all students were exemplifying today.
All right. Excuse me. All right, second section. We're interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your instruction. So discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
The shifts required by the Common Core state standards is really taking a look at the text to make sure that it is allowing students to look deeply into something. So as we want to look deeply into something, I need to start over. That's terrible. Can you read the question again?
Sure.
Okay.
So discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
Okay. The shifts required by this Common Core state standards is that we really allow students to go deeply into text. And I think in the past it used to be that we would just read a text and possibly answer some questions, and some would be really easy to answer and others might be more difficult to answer, and we'd brush over what was difficult. With the shifts, it's really making the teacher think about what they're using their time on. Are we really spending the time on the text, or are we just really just doing something to teach it and then move on? And so really thinking deeply about what is the purpose of what we're doing with the text, and is it complex enough that the kids are going to get a rich lesson out of it in the process.
Excellent. So how did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS?
I think in prior to this, I didn't spend in teaching this lesson prior, I probably would not have spent so much time in the text. We probably read this text now 4 or 5 times. In years past, I might have read it 2 and called it good, or maybe even 3 if I was lucky. So I think that really allowing the students time to process the text and have time to really understand it is important for them, because that's where they're going to get that richness and that understanding of what questions we're trying to pull from the text. It used to be in the past we might ask a question, and I was very tempted today, and I caught myself before I said it, was asking something about, well, how many of you have family members that live here versus live somewhere different? And that really isn't part of what is in the text. It does let students kind of think in their own belief what they have with those pieces. But in the text, it's really about giving that even playing field for everybody, because not everyone would have those same experiences of what we saw with the characters in the story. And so taking that piece of it and letting students really have that all access to what the text is asking, as opposed to just asking more, what's your feeling or what's your belief, as opposed to really getting into some factual things that you'd find in the evidence of the text, is what we're looking for.
All right. All right, so third section here. Student engagement is critical to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensured that all students had the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. So, How did you support all students in working with grade level texts? Do you provide scaffolding for students below grade level? And how do you create opportunities for students who are more advanced?
Right. I think that's probably the most difficult thing when you think about literacy now, looking at Common Core, and how do you scaffold for students when they might be reading below the text, or how do you help create an atmosphere for students that are higher level students and being able to still get something rich out of the text even though you might be scaffolding some things. So there were a couple of things that were happening in the lesson. The first one was the text was read aloud. So students that necessarily would struggle with reading, they were able to listen and follow along. That wasn't necessarily the case in the lesson as you saw. And then personally, as a teacher, you go back and forth with how you group students. And in the past, I might, or even yesterday, I might have grouped students from the group of someone that maybe is more low performing with someone that might be medium performing, or someone that's medium performing with someone that's high performing. But really looking at this lesson, in order to get some rich conversation out of it, I grouped students based on abilities. And so what you saw, hopefully in the video, and what you might hear as you go back through it, is there were some students sitting together that were higher level thinkers and much higher readers. So I'm hoping that their conversations that came out of the questions that we were asking and looking at the evidence would be at a much higher level, comprehension level and conversation, whereas the lower students that you saw, they were grouped together, and that is a gamble, because then when you group those students together, they kind of just stare at each other, and they don't necessarily talk to one another, and so that's where the teacher has to quickly intervene and go in and see what they're thinking. Unfortunately, with the larger group that I have, it is difficult to do those pieces and really making sure that we're scaffolding throughout the whole piece. As we ran out of time, I did then stop and have the students go back and read one page on their own. And if you saw, some students were still trying to write down their evidence from the question that we had before, and others were moving on and already had 4 or 5 hands up of students that were ready to explore and tell me what they had found in the text. So it's a difficult piece I think teachers have to decide and try to balance throughout the day when they're teaching the Common Core.
All right, good answer. How do you know that the students were able to successfully respond to the text-dependent questions and tasks with precision?
How will I know that students were able to respond to the question and then put that on paper? I think that part of it is looking and observing what students are doing in the classroom, but a lot of times teachers are so busy teaching that it's hard for us to be able to pick apart what we're doing. And as you saw, I was reading out loud the whole time, so there was no real downtime for me other than when the students were sharing with one another. So what will happen tonight is I will take their papers and I will look at them and see where we are with what they've written and what they haven't written, and seeing where they're just copying as opposed to they're putting down some of their own thoughts, and then seeing where that next level where that next step will be with those students with support. We might change that up a little bit the next day when we take our lesson, and I may have the kids read some of the text on their own, and I may pull that group of 10 students that was really struggling and really do more of a read with them and let the others go because they understand the format. And so that might be an opportunity for those students that are higher level thinkers to be able to finish with that and start their draft while I really scaffold a little bit more with the students that were struggling in this first day of the lesson.
Okay. And then which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson?
I think the best Core Action 3 that the students are exemplifying is the piece where the teacher, unfortunately, is the one that's allowing for conversations to take place within the lesson. The questions were provided for them. Whether or not they chose to turn to each other and actually have those deep and rich conversations was pretty much what the students were going to decide on their own. And we're working toward some of the other indicators where the students are starting to see their own progress and push themselves to be those learners. However, in third grade, that's a very difficult task to get them to do. When Common Core first came out, I was teaching sixth grade, and doing this with a group of sixth graders is much different than what you're doing with a third grade, because in third grade, you're still teaching them how to be a student. And in first K through 2, they're still learning how to read. And when they do come in the doors in third grade, now they know how to read. How do we get them to think critically? And that's where they're jumping into the text. And it's very difficult to get some of these students because some of them aren't ready. And so we've got to figure out a way to get them ready. So it's really more with Core Action 3, I think, with third grade for a good portion of the year. It's really creating those conditions for them and then allowing those students that are able to take those conditions and go with it, and then really seeing what students still need more conditioning and helping them through that process.
Cool. All right, so the last two here.
Okay.
Reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well and what might you do differently?
With the lesson, what I felt went well was well, there were a lot of things I think that students could have improved upon. I do think what went well was that we were looking at the text, which is really what we're trying to do in our shifts, and we were trying to find evidence in that text. What I would do differently and what I will be doing differently, because this lesson lends itself to a 3-day process or a 2-day process, what we will be doing the next day will be to take the text, and again, I think I mentioned it before, I think what I will do is allow students that are really understanding what the process is and let them do that on their own and have those discussions and have those rich discussions with themselves, because they're the type of personalities that will. And taking those 10 students and really reading the text with them. I may not read it for them. I think I may challenge them to see if they will read it, and then wait and wait and wait until they're able to pull that evidence out. I think sometimes they are waiting for me to give them those answers. And sometimes in a class setting like you saw today, we've got those high achievers and we've got those low performers, that sometimes you've got to bring those low performers along, but then sometimes you've got to slow down. And so that will be something that we will be doing in the next portion of our lesson.
All right, and last one here. Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions? Were there any surprises with student behaviors? Not really. It was a Friday afternoon being filmed. They're third graders. The students surprise me when they're very engaged, and writing and finding things in text is not always something that a student likes to do. And again, those that are struggling tend to not be as focused as those that are very into the text, because they get it, they understand it, they know what they need to do. Whereas the lower performers, they're just waiting, they're just biding time. And was I surprised by it? No. I was hoping that it might not be that way for them. And had I done this lesson on a Tuesday in the morning, I might have gotten the same reaction from them. But it did allow me to kind of think about what I want to do with them in the future, because I think that this piece of work that they need to be developing within themselves is an important piece of where we're going with their learning. Okay. All right, that is it.
All right.
Very good. Thank you so much.